Well, hi. First of all, let me wish you a happy Earth Day. Today, thanks to the worldwide coronavirus quarantine, the canals of Venice are running clear, the skies over cities and plains are crystalline blue, the Himalayas are visible in India from 100 miles away, wild animals are reasserting their natural territories, and streets and beaches are free of litter. So far. When I got home from my summer in Germany in 1963, I was stunned by how gray the air was over the airport and how much trash littered the highway toward home. In Germany, I had gotten used to clear skies and clean roads and sidewalks. In college, the late-night conversations and political activities were focused on resistance to the war in Vietnam and concern about the environment, an issue that had been brought urgently to public attention by the 1962 publication of Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. Ideas about sustainability, organic foods, and the Back to the Land movement, an issue of concern in the mid-19th century, too, as Thoreau and the Alcott family could tell you, again, were important. The first Earth Day grew out of these concerns and increased environmental awareness in America. In July of 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was established by special executive order. Earth Day also led to the passage of the Clean Water and Endangered Species Acts. But since then, corporate lobbying has weakened many of those protections, as we can see if we look. So today, as you put on your mask and go to the store, consider it not only a loving act meant to protect friends and strangers alike from the ravages of COVID-19, but also a recommitment to the goals of Earth Day, sustainability of a livable and beautiful planet. End of public service announcement. This week's readings include Emerson's The Poet, Wheatley's To S.M., a Young African Painter, Bryant, The Prairies, Whitman, Preface to Leaves of Grass and Letter to Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Poe, The Raven. One student, only one, contacted me to tell me that in her text she couldn't find the letter to Ralph Waldo Emerson. It is in mine, but you can find it online too. Just type in Letter to Ralph Waldo Emerson, and there it will be. We've already discussed the poetry of Phyllis Wheatley, in particular her On Being Brought from Africa. She was bought as a companion to John Wheatley's cherished wife, who recognized her intellectual gifts and provided her with the educational support to develop them, who then supported the publication of her poetry. Wheatley expressed her gratitude warmly in her verses, which are also proof of the influence of European literary models on American artists. In particular, she adopts the use of rhyme and regular meter in established verse forms that nearly all other English-speaking literary artists of the 18th century, that is the 1700s, considered essential in poetry. And 2SM in the same iambic pentameter, let me say that again. And 2SM in the same iambic pentametric couplets that she almost always uses, praises the deathless glories of the portraits and other paintings of his she saw in a reception for Boston's artistic elite, and envisions Scipio Moorhead's muse and hers accompanying them to heaven, where they would continue to write about and paint the heavenly scene. The Wheatleys hired Moorhead to paint Phyllis's portrait, by the way, and it remains the only image we have of her. You can see it and other work of his on the internet under Scipio Moorhead, and this is spelled out in one of the footnotes to the poem 2SM. It would be wrong to classify Wheatley and Moorhead as imitative only. They were rather practicing their arts along the same lines as every other serious artist of their time. The British followed the classics, Greek and Roman poetry, in translation, and British writers of the 17th and 18th centuries, and Americans followed the British. European and American painters strove for a heightened realism. Any artist will tell you how hard it is to get an appreciative audience if you break from tradition. What serious artists have done before us is our definition of art. If you want to read about the dangers to popular culture of such imitation. Google Twain and Civil War and Sir Walter Scott and read the Harper's article that comes up. But every era is nevertheless also a time of artistic experimentation, successful or not. And in America, particularly the North, it was both successful and interesting. The growth of the magazine and other illustrated periodicals as vehicles for literary art also contributed greatly to the opportunities for experimentation. William Cullen Bryant was primarily a newspaper editor, although he refrained from using his paper to publicize his poetry, all of which involve a certain amount of experimentation. His To a Waterfowl, for instance, 1818, uses a rhyme scheme ABAB, but in a pattern of lines of two different lengths, trimeter and hexameter, in mirrored repetition. The Prairies, Thanatopsis, and other poems use blank verse, that is, unrhymed iambic pentameter, popular in the 16th and 17th century in England, but not much used in America. This is a particularly good choice for The Prairies, 1834, which is a poem about change over time, because it enables him to maintain rhythmic flow while remaining free of a predictable structure or the challenges of rhyme. The Prairies, in which the speaker on horseback crosses an American plain where waves of settlement over millennia have meant establishment, ouster, and replacement of a sequence of peoples, and by implication more waves to come, that advancing multitude the speaker fancies he already hears. He is, in fact, reviewing what was known about the history of the American Central Plains, but outside history himself, he is in the wilderness alone, suspended between histories and civilization. Ralph Waldo Emerson we have discussed before, as the scholar and innovative thinker of his time, seeking to articulate a new person for the new nation and its new citizen, the American. In his The Poet, 1844, he develops some of the ideas he expressed earlier in Self-Reliance and the American Scholar, particularly the importance of departing from imported or inherited models in a quest for genuine personal authenticity. We also see echoes of his On Nature as he seeks to express the true artist's relationship with the land, the natural world. The poet makes a poem of. A thought so passionate that it has its own architecture, a thought that exists prior to the form it will take. Nature's beauty becomes a higher beauty when expressed, he says. People who see themselves as poets study rules and imitate. People who are poets are and inhabit symbols of the intoxication of reality. Art is the path of the creator to his works. In their works, poets are free and make free. They liberate from language the events and images and associations that dwell in the words. They reconcile all things in the intoxication of perceiving deeply and particularly. In America, Emerson says, is the greatest and richest of poems, our incomparable materials, and the barbarism of materialism of the times, awaiting its liberated God. But, he laments, we have yet had no genius in America to dare to be a poet. Doubt not, O poet, he concludes, but persist. Say, it is in me and shall out. And this is the reward, that the ideal shall be real to thee. There at his printing press hearing this challenge was Walt Whitman. In 1850 he was printing a book that he thought was what Emerson was envisioning, so he sent him a copy of Leaves of Grass, first edition. Emerson's somewhat stunned but enthusiastic thank you letter to Whitman is in your text. Rather than answer it, Whitman decided to quote from it on the binding of his book and include its text in the second edition, to Emerson's annoyance. Nevertheless, that Whitman assumed Emerson would rejoice is clearly implied in the letter he wrote to Emerson in 1856, the time of the second edition of Leaves of Grass. Quote, "Dear Master, dear friend and master," he begins, "I much enjoy making poems. The work of my life is making poems. Master, I am a man who has perfect faith." He adds that swiftly on limitless foundations, the United States too are founding a literature to be our own, to be electric, fresh, lusty, to express the full-size body, male and female, to give the modern meaning of things, to grow up beautiful, lust commemorate with America, with all the passions of home. Europeans call and taunt, where are any mental expressions from you beyond what you have copied or stolen? Where are born throngs of poets? You are young, have the perfectest of dialects, a free press, a free government, the world forwarding the best to be with you. Open the doors of the West. Call for new great masters to comprehend new arts, new perfections, new wants. A profound person can easily know more of the people than they know of themselves. America, having duly conceived, bears out of herself offspring of her own to do the workmanship wanted. If we don't answer this call, Whitman suggests, we are failures. Next week we'll be talking about Whitman's actual poems and those of Emily Dickinson as well, an innovator of a very different type. This week we also read Edgar Allan Poe's wonderful poem, The Raven, with its hypnotic rhythm and rhyme scheme and its disturbing exploration of a psychological state. Psychology, a new field in the 19th century. With his tormented and hyper-lived life and his passion for literary excellence in various forms, he is one of the most remarkable and important figures in American literature, even though he died at the young age of 40. Poet, story writer, inventor of the modern detective story, literary critic and editor, he had sufficient impact with his work to prepare the world for modernism, to make his mark in England and France as well as in his own country, and to give us an aesthetic vocabulary for psychological horror and appreciation for words and images as artifacts as well as bearers of meaning. As Whitman threw off the bonds of conventional form, subject, and literary stance, Poe offered the concern of effect on a mass audience and the concept of art and life as a pursuit of the beautiful through a world of irrationality, violence, alienation, and repression. And you thought literature was just books. See you next week.